Hello everyone, I'm Claire. I'm the Church Buildings Development Project Officer for the Diocese of Coventry. I'll tell you a little bit more about my role later. It's also interesting to note that as this project was going on, I was also DAC Secretary at the time. I since have stopped being DAC Secretary as of September this year, and I just focus on the projects and development work. And I think that's largely in response to projects like this that we've had in the diocese, really big, complicated projects. The diocese really felt that we needed more of a focus and more of a support for parishes. So it's a project that was a huge learning curve for me and the diocese, and I think it's really influenced how the diocese deals with these sorts of projects now. So on the night of the 14th of March 2008, the Church of St Nicholas in Radcliffe was devastated by an arson attack. This sort of project, this sort of catastrophe is mercifully very rare, but there are occasions when we as diocesan officers are periodically involved in very big, very complex cases which have a completely separate set of issues and challenges that the smaller cases that we perhaps usually deal with have. And I think the scale and complexity involved in this project caused a lot of confusion and a lot of delays or perceived delays anyway, and quite difficult relationships occurred along the route a bit as well. It was described by one of our previous archdeacons as the biggest building project in the diocese since the bombing of the cathedral back in 1940. So it was a huge project for Coventry DAC to deal with. And what I really want to do at this paper is look at the difficulties faced by the PCC in rebuilding their church and building a new church in the shell of an old building essentially, and the kind of design issues that arose from that, and also the frustrations that they encountered along the way. And really just to better consider how we can support parishes in something like this. So this is the church as was, through various stages. It was grade 2 listed. I'm assuming it's not anymore. This is something I was talking about last night. I'd be quite interested.
It's been delisted, it will be.
Yeah, I would just imagine it has been. I've not actually seen anything saying that, but it might be just a bit.
But if it hasn't, it's still listed.
Yeah, rather unhelpfully, I'm the Historic England, and I asked the question a long time ago, and of a previous chief legal officer, and he said that he thought that actually all the bits were still listed, all the smoke, all the little bits of action, all the rest of it was still in some way listed. But that's a rather unhelpful.
Yeah, I think you do, and I don't know whether that process has been through actually.
It's some do get, some will remain on, because there's enough left of that has special interest.
Yeah. Interesting. I should delve into that a little bit further, I think. So it had its origins in the 12th century. In the 14th century, it was enlarged, and the tower was built. And in the 1838, it was altered again with the addition of a north aisle, a vestry, and a porch, and 3 windows were inserted into the south hall. It was extensively rebuilt in 1889, like many churches of this time. The old chancel was demolished and rebuilt bigger and in brick this time, largely in brick anyway. And the north aisle and the vestry were demolished down to windowsill level and then rebuilt, so they were higher and imposing. And then new floors were laid throughout as well. So at the time of the fire, all that remained of the old church was the tower, some of the stonework on the south wall of the nave, and the Norman window, which you can just see there. That little one there is the Norman window. However, hold on. We don't. Yes, that's right. Sorry. We don't have a great record of the church before the fire, which is really, really sad. I'm sure there's lots of photographs and things lying around within the parish somewhere, but they've not all been collated to have a huge record. Oh, dear. Well, there we go. I think I'm pressing buttons. Apologies. So we don't have a complete record of what was there before, which is a shame, and maybe that's something we need to think about for churches in disaster management, really. But the Victorian County history was very helpful and recalls some of the features. There was some heraldic glazing in the west window dating to the 17th century. There were 4 historic bells, 3 of which dated to the first half of the 17th century and 1 early 19th century one as well. And there were also 2 other bells which were introduced in the 1990s when the old wooden bell frame was replaced by a cast iron one. But interestingly, the old wooden bell frame was retained in place. Sadly, obviously, it's not there anymore. The 1976 QI report by Andrew Gardner notes that the chancel is the most interesting part, with its encaustic tiles, its east window by Kemp, dating to the 1889 rebuilding, and the stone Victorian reredos, which you can just see there, which he describes as all having escaped the mutilation during the period when they were totally unfashionable, which I thought was a lovely little phrase. And it also highlights that the walls were also panelled in the old box pews as well. The statement of significance referred to an oak chest dating to the 17th century, an 18th century vestments cupboard, a brass war memorial for the village, and also another plaque which commemorated other casualties that died in more recent conflicts. The organ was an 1891 organ by Forster and Andrews and described as a very fine and unique instrument. However, by the morning of the 15th of March, there was very, very little left. The fire resulted in the complete loss of the roof structure and coverings, all the windows and the interior, and there was significant damage to the internal stonework as well. And what remained was essentially this masonry shell. And the reader of the parish, in an email to the diocese, stated that it was our church, all that remains now is the outer shell, blackened and forlorn. And so in the days after the fire, obviously you can imagine you had a very emotional and very upset PCC, and the congregation and the community actually were all, felt this sense of loss very profoundly. And one of the families who lived in the parish for generations reported that its history gone up in flames, and there were so many things that we took for granted. That morning of the fire, a lot of the villagers came down to sort of show their support for the PCC and the congregation and kind of look at the state that the church was in. And Reverend Green, who's the vicar there, reported that sort of sense of loss and shock and kind of grief that kind of befell the village at that time. And I think we as heritage professionals often speak of the significance of church buildings in communities and their role in the history of those that live there. And I think this article really evoked that profound sense of place that the church had. And I think many felt really surprised at just how much impact the loss of that building and the loss of their history had on them, and just the feelings were really quite emotional. But fortunately, Reverend Green felt that the need to rebuild was almost instantaneous. He knew that that's what they wanted to do with that building. But obviously, embarking on such a project is no mean feat. There was a long period of visioning and a long period of consultation, exploring needs, exploring options, thinking about what they wanted to do with the church to take it forward into the 21st century. On top of that, they also had to wait a considerably long amount of time to get a settlement from the OG. And until they knew that, I think it was difficult for them to really be able to realise what they wanted to do, because they needed to know exactly how much money they would have. So, obviously the DAC role in all this is to advise and help them and to steer this project to the point of receiving faculty. And I think it began really, really well, actually, and it did continue for a number of years like that. We had a site visit within a few months of the fire. The PCC worked on developing their statement of significance and needed put a lot of work into it. And within a year, they had an extensive options appraisal. And this was followed with more site visits and more conversations along the way. And everyone was very enthusiastic, and I think there was the general feeling was very positive. And the DAC were very supportive of the proposals on the whole. And it felt like a really exciting time, a really exciting project, this sort of phoenix rising from the ashes sort of thing. The application for notification of advice, the DAC certificate as was put in July 2011, so that's just over 3 years after the fire. And the notification of advice was issued and recommended by the DAC 2 months later, and obviously that was soon followed by the faculty. It came with numerous conditions, because as you can imagine, of a project of this scale, there's so many details that needed to be thought through. They just couldn't have everything ready in time for the final application. So there were conditions relating to the lighting, to the heating, to the AV systems, to the musical provision, stained glass furniture, all those bits were part of the conditions of the faculty. So it all seemed to go quite well, but despite all this, the DAC received an awful lot of criticism about how the process went. It was accused of causing delays, and there were even personal slights against specific members of the DAC. And the Reverend Green said that he felt like he'd been battling against the diocese instead of working with it. Now, in defence of the DAC, I think this is largely undisturbed and